All right, I just want to welcome everyone for our first training workshop, and we promised that today we'll be focusing on the facilitator, the effective facilitator. That's the title or the headline that I felt like would resonate with what we need, because I believe that each one of us are facilitators, have graduated to become facilitators, regardless of where you've been coming from. You've proven it with various companies doing facilitation everywhere. So I'm not trying to teach you what a facilitator is. I'm not trying to teach you how to conduct facilitation, but I want us to take this sort of as a refresher program so that we can remind each other of the things that we might have forgotten, or maybe they have slipped out of our minds. Without further ado, I know that everyone is in a hurry to quickly go to a weekend. I'm not going to waste much of your time. That's why we adjusted the time so that instead of having this session at 2, we're going to have it at quarter to 2. And let's go right into it. So in this session, what we'll be doing will be just covering, reminding each other, like I said prior, that we are looking at the facilitator as a whole. So I'm not going to do much of the technical stuff from the ICT perspective, but I'll be looking at the actual technicalities involved with the training. Right. So we are a training franchise. So I guess it will be very important for us to stick to fundamentals, some things that become an ultimate definition of who we truly are. So if we focus much of our time, maybe upskilling ourselves in the ICT, we might end up failing to understand the basics, which is the facilitation, assessing, and moderator. So myself, I'm going to facilitate the facilitator. We have appointed 2 more guys who will come in to help with assessor, a refresher program, and moderator refresher program. All right, let's go right into it. I started off by saying that what is a facilitator? I guess it's a question that most of us already know what it is, but I came across very interesting definitions that I want us to just explore together, and then we take it from there. So the first definition that I came across is saying that a facilitator is anyone who facilitates the acquisition of knowledge and competencies by establishing a favorable learning environment, including those exercising a teaching, training, or guidance function. It actually broadens to say the facilitator orientates the learner by giving guidelines, feedback, and advice throughout the learning process, in addition to assisting the development of knowledge and competencies. I know it's quite a long definition. The second definition is quite shorter that I came across. It says that a facilitator is a learning facilitator is an active and a direct learning helper whose roles are to create an atmosphere for study, to help learners get to their goals, and to encourage social interaction among professors, lecturers, or let me say different boards and the students. Right, that was the second definition derived from one of the websites that I came across. I will share with you all these references when we are done with the meeting, when you are referring. This third definition that I came across is becoming shorter and shorter. It says that it's an individual responsible for guiding, mentoring, and managing a learner to the completion of an educational event. Right. So I still felt like there was still a gap. As much as these definitions are very much precise and straight to the point, I felt like there's still a gap that still needed to be clarified on what exactly a facilitator is. Is a facilitator an instructor? Is a facilitator a trainer? Is a facilitator a lecturer? Is a facilitator a teacher? What exactly is a facilitator? Then I came across something very shorter. It actually says these are stakeholders who diffuse self-directed learning material. I like the part where we say it's self-directed learning materials. So clearly, what I came up with from all these three definitions or four definitions, I realized something, that a facilitator has nothing to do with the depositing of the knowledge into the empty brains. It's unlike in the teaching space or as an instructor. You come in just to give information on empty brains. We view learners as empty vessels where the moment they walk into Sparrow, all we do is just to transfer the information right away from the facilitator or from a subject matter expert right into the empty brain, which is not the case. Majority of facilitation has to be centered around the learner. It has to be centered around the learner constructing their own ideas and their own learning, owning it, without an individual having to stand to give detailed information, reading from a book, reading from notes, just projecting material right onto the empty brains. When we find ourselves going in that direction, I'm not saying that it is wrong that we've been doing it, but I want us to refresh one another to say that the reason why we call each other facilitators, it has to do with us diffusing self-directed learning materials. In other words, the learners, they own their learning, they push their own learning, and ourselves, we are there to reinforce, we are there to give guidelines, we are there to give a sort of informed decision and construct based on the knowledge. I'm going to go through the entire thing so that you understand where you're coming from. Right. There are certain myths that have been said about facilitators. The first myth that is so common that most of the people are confusing is a myth that facilitation is another name for teaching. In this session, I want us to correct that by clarifying that in teaching, information will flow primarily from the teacher to the participant. In other words, it is the teacher who carries the data. It is the key teacher who reads the book for the learners. It is the teacher who does the research for the learners. And then all the teacher does, they can then go and allow the flow of information straight from the teacher right through to the participant. That's not what facilitation is. Facilitation in reality, it has to do with information flowing primarily from the participants to each other and to the facilitator. Look at the difference there. The teacher is the main source of the knowledge. The lecturer is the main source of the knowledge. The facilitator, uh, on the other end, is there to allow the flow of information from one participant to the other. In other words, the learners will be able to own their own knowledge. They can be able to be engaged in various groups, and they can be able to share ideas. And you, as a facilitator, you come in just to create a reinforcement, which is somehow what we call scaffolding. Right. For some of you who have studied a little bit of some psychology there in education, there is something called that we call scaffolding. Scaffolding says that the facilitator is not at the top right there in the sky and is trying to lift the learners from the ground. Scaffolding says that the facilitator comes to the level of the learners, and then you build. Every time, whenever you build, you raise up the scaffold to another level. You build to that level and then you raise the scaffold. That's what we call scaffolding. All right, it's the same principle that is being used whenever you're building a building. Whenever you're building a building, you don't go up and set up a scaffold that goes all the way above, way above the foundation. How are you going to pull up the bricks to the top yet there is no wall built to reach that height? So in scaffolding, what they do is like they build from the ground right through to the level where people can reach, and then from then they start setting up a scaffold that will take it to another level, and they keep on building it upwards. So that's the approach that we need to get to say that information needs to flow primarily from the participant to the participant, and the facilitator is there to reinforce, to scaffold, and to help the learners achieve. I'm not so sure if I'm going too quick or I'm going too slow. I hope everyone is still here with me. Take note that this session I'm recording it, so I'm not going to take much of the questions for now. If you're going to go to refer to refer, you're going to go straight to the videos that I'm going to be posting. Right. So, what is the role of a facilitator? The role of a facilitator, the number one role of a facilitator is to shut up. Right. I know that is a very curious statement to say, but um, majority of the times, facilitators do the talking. You stand in front of the class and start teaching. It's not facilitation. When you stand in front of the class and you could talk the whole day from 8 right through to 2, you are a teacher, you are a lecturer, you are a professor. But here we want facilitators. In other words, the role number one of a facilitator is to learn how to limit the time you are speaking. In other words, if we walk into the class, if you're doing majority of the talking and your learners are doing nothing, you are delivering knowledge straight from your head to the brains, which is generally the refused, because in general the mind works this way. It does not generally identify with something that it's imposed to. It only works well whenever there is something that is already constructed in it, and then people learn by doing. So the role number one of facilitator is to ensure that you shut up a lot. In other words, you open so much room for the learners to do the talking, to do the group discussions, to get involved, to discuss, to present. That way, that's the role number one of a facilitator. You are there to reinforce. You are there to scaffold. You are there to help the learners achieve a certain goal or achieve a certain outcome, but they are not going to achieve it because you are the one who does majority of the talking. That's the experience I learned the hard way. When I was still a facilitator, one thing that I would do, I would come into a class, plan the whole night. After planning the whole night, I go into a class and start talking the whole time. And then when I'm done, the next thing, people cannot remember what I just said. People will always remember what they are involved in doing. So let's try to refrain from doing the talking the whole day and start focusing on engaging the learners so that they do the talking and we play the role of a facilitator. The second role, the facilitator is there to ask meaningful, provocative, open-ended question, remaining aware of group dynamics at all times. I'll read this again. You are always ensuring that you ask meaningful questions. You provoke the learners into responding to those questions. You give open-ended questions. You always are aware of the group dynamics at all the times. Right. So that is the role number two. Right. So if I'm going to introduce a new lesson to my group, and then the moment I walk in, I want to give you two scenarios. Facilitator number one walks into class and then begins to introduce. Let's say I'm introducing the Ohm's law, which is an electrical question. All right. So I walk in there and I start going straight to what an Ohm's law is. I go to the definition right away. Resistance, voltage, etc., etc. Voltage is directly proportional to resistance, etc., etc. As long as current is remaining constant, I keep going on and on and on. It's easy for learners to forget. On the other end, if approaching it with a second approach of a facilitator number two, who will begin to ask the questions. The first question will be, what do you understand about Ohm's law? Have you ever heard about Ohm's law? That's creating a provocation. That's creating sort of open-ended questions that will make learners start to think, and that way it engages everyone in a group setting. Right. So let's build that kind of culture. The role number three is to provide many opportunities for participants to figure out things for themselves. In other words, if you are the answer to every question they give you, if you are the answer to every question they give you, You become more or less like a professor. You become more or less like a lecturer. You become more or less like a teacher. You're not doing the role of a facilitator. Sometimes it's very good as a facilitator to say, I don't know. Figure out the answers yourself. I know majority of them say, I know it looks so terrible to the learners if a facilitator doesn't know. But it's a good approach to provoke them into thinking, to provoke them into research. You are more or less like creating an opportunity for them to participate in figuring things all by themselves. So that's why, in conclusion, I say that facilitators they ask questions, they question the learners, they make sure they provoke the learners and give open-ended questions that will always give the learners the chance to demonstrate what they already know. Because we can't assume that the learners don't know. Some already know, but we just need to reconstruct the information so that it meets the prescribed outcomes. Right. So, what makes a facilitator an effective facilitator? I identified certain areas that will make you an effective facilitator. Number one, it is well planning and preparing stuff. Um, it is the role of a facilitator to ensure that you do your analysis of your learners and identify the learner needs. Each and everyone who walks into your session, each and everyone who walks into your class, uh, they have got different learning needs. Some are psychosocial needs, some are let me call it physio psychosocial needs, where we say that some have got a certain need that others do not need. Some they do have special needs. So it is the duty of a facilitator to ensure that during the planning and the preparing of your learners, you ensure that you analyze them one by one and identifying their learning needs. Someone might have a special need. Someone might not have a special need. So how do you bring them into the same classroom? By clearly analyzing each one of the learners at the planning and preparing phase. Secondly, we need to be able to plan to cater for needs of those learners and the stakeholders. In other words, I will just give you an example of a class that is made up of individuals with disabilities. You find that within the same class, there is one with one hand, and the other one is short-sighted, right? So whenever now you're going to be giving an assessment in terms of before you even get to the assessment, uh, during your delivery, the content that you're going to be providing, is it fair to accommodate all the learners, right? In other words, the choice of the of the material you use, the choice of the font that you will use, how big, how small it's going to be, the choice of the color that you will use. Is it a color that will accommodate the people who are colorblind or not? The activity that I'm going to choose, is it going to benefit the people that are full bodied, or it's going to disadvantage the ones on wheelchairs? So that happens through the planning and the preparing phase before you even move on to anything. So I went ahead of myself by mentioning the resources. Now, the resources that you're gonna go to, the locations where the activities or the actual training is gonna happen, the personnel are arranged to suit intended delivery. I will explain on this one. Um, one of the things that I used to do when I was still a facilitator, or let me say I'm still a facilitator, I am. So one of the things that I do is I walk into a class, I identify learners with various disabilities. For example, if a person is short-sighted, move them from the back to the front. If a person is tall and might be blocking the vision, move them slightly backwards. If a person has um, hearing problem, push them forward so that you can be able to speak. That's what we mean by arranging the environment to suit different learner requirements. So meaning that the resources that you're going to have, already you have noticed that your class you have got a learner with no fingers, it means that you should be able to come up with a way to get a mouse, request a mouse that is a ball instead of the one that is click buttons, right? So all of those are different resources that we need to put in mind during the planning and the preparing of that. That's what make one an effective facilitator, right? The learning material that you will provide, preparation of it. Sometimes some learners have got short vision, some learners have got long vision. So in your choice of the material, when you're going out to print out, are you going to say, I've got 20 learners, ask the print out guy to print out exactly 20? There are some that need a bigger font. There are some that need even smaller font. So that prep of the material should accommodate all of those kind of settings. If it's an online session, when you're training on a screen, is your screen that you're providing, the material that you're providing, is it too bright? Is it too colorful? Or does it lack color? So as a result of that, you choose the learning material that suit the group in different requirements. That's what we mean by fairness. That's what we mean by uh, accommodation of everyone. So those are kind of things that will not surprise you when you walk into the class. Those are the kind of things that should be involved in the planning and the preparing, because in general these learners will not speak, they will keep quiet and they will be holding back. The next thing you're complaining, this person is always slow in class, yet the person is sitting at the back and they've got a poor vision. Right, the learning material content, I think I covered that in detail. Facilitation methods. Now the choices of facilitations that you will use. When we talk about the methodology, we're talking about different delivery methods. The first one can be presentations. The other one can be group discussions. The other one is where you are the one who is doing the actual presentation, that I normally discourage, because you are actually trying to extrapolate information from the learners. So the best way to go around it is to ensure that you limit the amount of time you spend talking, but to engage the learners in group discussion, engage the learners in presentation, engage learners in research. Right. All of those are different methodologies that you can employ. If it is role plays, introduce role plays. Role plays must not only be used in communication. Role plays must not only be used whenever you're training a unit standard speaking about role plays. It has to be a lifetime, or let me say throughout the course type of a thing, whereby it's a methodology of your delivery. Right. The most amazing sessions that I will attend to would have to be the sessions where all learners are engaged, be it in group, be it in debates. All of that are different methodologies that you can use. The processes, we're talking about the facilitation process, I guess it speaks to the same methodologies. So all of those things you need to put in place during the planning phase. Right. So then the learning environment, we highlighted that when we're talking about the resources, the locations, and the arranging the environment so that it suits different learners. It involves a lot of planning. Sometimes whenever we are talking about the admissions, whenever you go and look at the learners, you check how many learners have got wheelchairs. So the old lab won't work. The first floor won't work for them. Do the same also. Implement it in your group. Ensure that whenever you're planning, look at the environment. Is it accommodating for those groups of learners? And then the review criteria, you put those reviews to check. Normally it works well when you have implemented module 2, for example, and you are going to use module 1 as a review. Maybe you made mistake, you discovered along the way that there is a learner that made a mistake, that had a problem with eyesight. Now that I'm moving to module 2, now I can be able to print out copies of which with bigger font. That's what we mean by reviewing your criteria, etc., etc. I'm not so sure if I'm still with you, but let's go through it. If you want to go back, you can always go back, and I've got an open office policy to say if you want me to explain further, you can come through. Right. So an effective facilitator also facilitate learning. Right. You facilitate learning. How do you do so? the learning facilitated in a coherent manner. In other words, there has to be a clearly cut, coherent manner in which you do your delivery. There has to be a clear, coherent manner in which you do your delivery. Oh, something went disappeared. Oh, there you go. Right. So you need to give a coherent manner. In other words, whenever you're doing your facilitation, there has to be a clearly outlined coherence. Coherence speaks about the order, speaks about chronological order. There is no way you're going to come in today and train on the introduction of verbal communication. Then the following tomorrow, you talk about verbal communication again and again and again. It keeps on coming. There has to be certain coherence. You link one unit standard or link one module to another. There is no module that works single-handedly. One module is always interlinking with the other. So it's always good to bring in that coherent manner to say that what we are training today speaks to what we did yesterday or we did in another unit standard. Make sure the learning environment and facilitation approach promotes open interaction, right? Uh, I remember at some point when we were doing the end user, I had an example of a learner. It was a youngster that used to like to go around. I noticed that afterwards, I realized that he had an AD, attention deficit disorder type of thing. So it so happened that when we discovered that, I realized, and it made me realize that no, he cannot sit down. The youngster cannot sit down. So I created an open interaction for that particular youngster to be able to even move around during the sessions. If he feels like sitting at the back at that time, let him sit at the back at that time. If he moves to another session, let him do so, as long as you plan it to be more productive and it doesn't turn into chaos. So let's always create an environment where we promote an open interaction. There is no such thing like silence in class. Silence in class. Actually, the most effective classroom sessions are ones where there is organized noise. When I'm saying organized noise, I'm talking about people interacting, people talking, people discussing something relevant to what's being trained in class. Right, we need to develop concepts through participation. In other words, let's try to get learners participate in our training, get them into groups, get them to interact with everyone else during the actual training. Groups must be managed in line with facilitation principles. In other words, you set certain principles to say that I'm not going to do much of the talking. So I identify group leaders who will become more or less like facilitators of that particular topic that you'll be looking at. That's what we mean by implementing an open interaction. Your questioning techniques must be consistent. In other words, when you are asking questions, in the previous slide, we highlighted that facilitators generally ask. So your questioning techniques needs to be revamped. How do I ask my questions? How do I try by all means to avoid close-ended questions? Because once you all go to close-ended questions, it does not provoke learners into thinking. It's just a yes or no type of a thing. So your questioning techniques should show consistency in terms of being open-ended always. Monitoring learner progress. Majority of the times we forget to follow up the learners, especially the ones that tend to be behind, and we focus on the ones that are moving faster than others. So let's try by all means to always accommodate each one of them, monitoring progress, checking how far is John from Sarah, right? That makes it more effective in your facilitation. Right. The third item is evaluating learning and facilitation. If you don't check your feedback from the learners, once in a while, write down a feedback. Ask them to give you a feedback about how the lesson went. and be always open for them to criticize and say that no, it was a boring class. And then you look at better ways to try and make it more entertaining and more engaging. Right. Always make sure that you look at the strength and the weaknesses of your planning. Every time, whenever you're going to do another module, always reflect, evaluate how the previous module or how the previous training went. Look at the strengths, the weaknesses of your planning, your preparation, and also the approach that you did. Right. So that's what we mean by evaluating your learning and your facilitation. Always make sure that you get involved in reviewing and the recommendation. Look, the material that we give, sometimes it gets outdated. So whilst you're doing the training, you realize that no, I'm no longer talking about Windows 98. Here we are talking about now the latest version of Windows. So you're allowed to review, check, find a better way to review and do recommendations accordingly. That's what makes a distinct facilitator. Right. I just launched a word that is called constructivism. I'm not so sure. I think this one I will leave it to the floor. Maybe I can get anyone who have got an understanding, who have came across the word constructivism, what it means. Anyone? No one? Yes, Mugelan. What does it mean? You're thinking out loud. Anyone, guys? Anyways, Memlin, I know you understand what constructivism is. Mr. Kelvin, Brasem, you're still fresh on this one. I think you covered it when you were doing your teaching recently. Constructivism. Right. So, what is constructivism? This theory was developed in the past, and it's a very powerful theory that is being used in most of the training methodologies. So, if you want to effectively engage your classroom, just in sort of a summary of what we covered, this theory is a good set example. I would encourage you to just go on Google, check the constructivism approach or constructivism theory. Some call them the constructivists. What are they? Right. So this theory, it says this: people actively construct or make their own knowledge, and that reality is determined by the experiences of the learner. People actively construct or make their own knowledge, and that reality is determined by the experiences of that person in question. Right. This was a definition by Eliot. Right. If you check, there are principles that are surrounding that construct. There are so many of them, but the whole idea is this: people are not being cans that are waiting for information to be poured in. That's what it means. It does. It says that it's not like people are just empty drums with empty brain and they are waiting for someone who is a subject matter expert who will then come in to deposit knowledge into those. Right. So people actively construct their own knowledge whilst they are interacting with TVs, watching series, watching movies, going out, interacting with friends, drinking somewhere, they are getting an underlying knowledge so that when they come into class, they already have knowledge that has been constructed in their brains. Now, those constructs, that's where we build on. We build on those constructs. That's what facilitation is. You are not putting information on empty brain. I'll give you an example of, let's say you're trying to build, right? It's different when you're building a house on an empty ground. You start from scratch. You have to dig the foundation and go deep inside. And then you put the concrete and set it up until it's a set up structure. That's an empty ground. People are not that. People are not empty grounds. People, they have some bits of information. It can be the correct or wrong information they have had, right? But they are more or less like a building that already has something built on it. It already has a foundation. So all we are doing is to set up constructs, is to build on top of that. So that's what constructivism is. It does not view people as empty brains, but it views people as as owning their own knowledge, constructing their own knowledge through their experiences with the world. Then we as facilitators come in to build on those constructs. There are so many principles around it, but I identified only two around the principles of constructivism. The first one is the fact that knowledge is constructed rather than innate or passively absorbed. Knowledge is something that is constructed. You can't say someone gave me knowledge. No one gives you knowledge. You construct it in your mind. No one says past knowledge to someone. It's constructed in their minds. So in full words, we say that constructivism's central idea is that human learning is constructed. That learners build new knowledge upon the foundation of previous learning. It can be learning as a result of the life experiences, or they learned it from someone else, or when they were interacting. So this prior knowledge influences what new or modified knowledge an individual will construct from new learning experiences. So in other words, we are more or less like building or correcting or reinforcing what's already an underlying knowledge. That's the principle number one. Knowledge is constructed rather than innate or passively absorbed. Number two, learning is an active process. What it means that learning is an active rather than a passive process. The passive view of teaching or views the learner as an empty vessel. Exactly what I was saying. To say a passive approach says a learner is an empty vessel that needs to be filled in with knowledge. Whereas in constructivism, we state that learners construct meaning from only through active engagement with the world. Whenever they are doing experiments, that's why we encourage people to do practicals. Whenever they are doing real world problem solving, information may be passively received, but understanding cannot be. For it must come from making meaningful connections between the knowledge that I know with the knowledge that I just received. So before, let me just break it down in simpler terms. What happens is this: when I'm going to learn a topic, let's say I don't know how to fix cars. I'm not a mechanic, but when I walk into the mechanics class, I it's not like I don't have an idea at all. I know there is an engine. I know there is a carburetor for all the cars, and nowadays maybe there is a fuel injector. I know the different spark plugs, four-stroke engines, two-stroke engines. I'm not so sure if it's still applicable, but that's an underlying knowledge that was accumulated as an experience when I was stuck in the middle of the road somewhere and could not fix a car. I have not yet been given formal knowledge on it, but when I was stuck, I understood that there is something called an ABS. This is how it works. There is something called a carburetor. This is how it works, right? Now, when I walk into a class, it's not like I'm walking in as an empty vessel. I'm walking in already with information that just needs to be reconstructed. I've got an idea, but I need it to be reconstructed. That's what we mean by active process and not passive process. In other words, information cannot be passed from one person to the other. We cannot view our learners as empty brains. Some of these learners have had life experiences that when they walk into your class somewhere, somehow, they are looking for you to be able to assist in the building of those information straight using the approach of constructivism. So let's make this principle become more or less our guide to say that I am a facilitator and not a teacher. I'm not going in to give information on empty vessels, but I'm there to reconstruct. So what is my responsibility as a facilitator in light of what we just highlighted? My responsibility of a facilitator, it is to create a collaborative problem solving environment where learners become active participants in their own learning. It's their own learning. They own it. They've got information, bits of information that are constructed in their brains. But this information just needs to be reconfigured so that they can then achieve the outcomes that we outlay. So the primary responsibility of your facilitator is to ensure that we create that environment for the learners to explore, to be provoked, to be asked questions, to build on top of the old knowledge that they already had. So the facilitator makes sure he or her helps the learners understand that pre-existing conceptions, because there are conceptions that are already pre-existing in their minds, right? So those pre-existing concepts, and you are there as a facilitator to ensure you guide the activity to address those preconceived ideas, and then you build on them. That's the fundamental principle of a facilitator. That's the fundamental responsibility of a facilitator, to construct information that is already existing, not to pass information. Why? Because knowledge is passive. It's not passive, but it is retained in the brains of the people through constructing their own knowledge. Right. So, in in addition to that, we say that how do we integrate it with what's happening in the IT world? The IT world introduced something called a flipped classroom. Not necessarily, I won't say necessarily the IT world. Let me define what a flipped classroom is so that you understand where I'm going with this. Right. So flipped learning or flipped classroom approach is a methodology that helps facilitators to prioritize active learning during class time by assigning students learning material and presentations to be viewed at home or outside of the class. Right. So we say that when people are coming into your class, they have got preconceived ideas, but somehow might not be the correct ones. So it is the duty of a facilitator to create an environment where learners will ever learn in class and out of class. That's where the flipped classroom approach is. You give them a task in class, they work on it in class. It can be a formative, a summative. That's what happens in class. But don't leave them to just depart out of the school premises without a task that they will learn whilst they are sitting in a taxi, that they will learn whilst they are at home, because that's when they construct their own knowledge. So when they are at home, that's where they construct their own knowledge. If they construct poison in their heads because the facilitator did not give them a guide to construct the right information, they will come back the previous day, they would have forgotten what was taught in the previous session. So my call for each one of us is to say, I don't want to call this a homework, but we are going to call it a flipped classroom approach, where there are tasks that are given in class, and also there are tasks that are given to them to practice at home or to go at home learning. It can be sort of a paper type of a thing or a book, or it can be a project where they are required to go and identify certain items. That way they will construct the right information so that when they come into class and you are building, you are just matching the old information in their brain and putting the new ideas, which somehow it won't be a hassle and the learners will never forget. In conclusion, I will say above all these ideas, you can do as much planning as you want. You can do as much of thinking that you want. You can do as much preps as you want as a facilitator. But in conclusion, I will say you only teach what you know, but you impart who you are. This is a statement that I got from Jack Frost. He actually was highlighting that no matter how much great as a facilitator you are, what you know you will be able to teach, But after the teaching what you know in class and you walk away, learners will always observe you as a subject matter expert, not only in class but also in real life. So what am I saying with this is this: the kind of culture that we instill on our learners needs to be reflected outside also when we have a chat. It's pointless to be in class, you say one thing, and now you're outside, you say the other. So we are an example to our learners. We are mentors to our learners. We are guides to our learners. So, meaning that who you are in class has to always stay as a reflection of who you are, even outside class. Right. So, people will always take you serious. The student will always take you serious by if you teach them and then you impart who you are. You are always late. Don't expect the learners to that you will teach them to be always early. You are always not submitting stuff on time. Don't expect your learners to submit stuff on time. You are always complaining about stuff. Don't expect your learners not to complain about your work. So you always teach what you know, but you impart who you are. So in everything you do, let us be exemplary and bring the right character to our learners. Remember, some of these learners, when they go to the workplace, they reflect what they were taught in class. If they were lazing around in class, they will lazy around at the workplace. But if we teach them the right principle by always showing up early, by always showing up that we are taking our job serious, they will also take us serious. You won't even have to hustle. And at the same time, we are setting them up for success at the workplace. I would like to appreciate each and everyone that came to join. I will make this presentation available as soon as I've managed to record or finalize it. I hope this session was beneficial to each one of us. I'm not so sure if you guys have got any additions or questions in this regard. Over to you. Yes, Mr. Boyke.
Mr. Prosper,
Yes, sir. I can hear you.
uh, yeah, laptop with Mr. Harris want to ask something. Over to you, Mr. Jim.
Okay. Yeah, Mr. Prosper, what I wanted to say is that these slides, they really open our eyes and really hit home. And it helped us with so many things, especially to understand our role as facilitators. What is it that we need to do? Thank you for that. And then it was well prepared and well informative. And I think we can take a whole lot of things from this and implement them in our facilitation on our daily basis. And true to that, we will learn a lot and then we will improve from this. And thank you for this once again.
Thank you very much, Mr. Harris. Thanks a lot. Yes, Ma'am Lena, observe you.
I have left the meeting.
Yes, Miss Lynn. All right. Thank you so much. Now, any other questions? Thank you so much for those words, Mr. Karetsi. Thank you so much. Any other meeting? Any other question or any contribution or anything that you would like to add from your own research that you would like to maybe to add to just benefit everyone else? Yes, again, Mr. Boyke.
Yeah, just to come in again, Mr. Prosper,
Yes.
because what I've seen, I think most of us we have done the facilitation course, and for those who have done it, it's more like a refresher course, and it would be nice if maybe like what we had today, if we could have it maybe in a month's time or two, in maybe quarterly or something like that, so that we could keep on repeating, because every knowledge that we get every time, it sounds like it's new most of the time when we get to have sessions like this. So it would be nice if we could have it maybe quarterly, and so that we can it can be a refresher to us.
Absolutely, absolutely. Yeah, thanks so much. We'll schedule. We'll make a plan and schedule accordingly to ensure that we always do these refresher programs. Yeah, I'm glad that it has been of help to you guys. I wish everyone would feel the same, so that we get to make use of these. I guess it's very important for us to get to remind some of those things. When I was also doing the research, I put so much effort to try and come up with this presentation. So when I was doing research, I realized that there are some of the things that I also did not know. So it was more or less also like a refresher for me to remember that there is something like this that we had already forgotten. Yeah. Thank you
Yeah,
so much.
yeah. What
Yeah.
also what I could maybe
Oh,
suggest,
Yes.
if we could even do the assessor also,
Yes.
more like this way, and then the moderator also, and also mentoring and coaching. If we could have platforms to do a
Absolutely, absolutely. We'll make those kind of things available. I guess this whole month, like we said, next week on Wednesday, we're going to do an assessor one. And I guess on Friday, if I'm not mistaken, we're going to do a moderator one. It will be something slightly the same. Let me say it's the same, but it will be presented by someone else. That in this case, we are still working on to put together the whole content so that we make it more effective. Definitely, I will take that word, Mr. Kharezi. Thank you so much. We're going to ensure that we make use of these things. We do it every now and then because we are reminding one another of the whole this whole idea about facilitation, assessor, and of course moderator. And please take note that when we do these things, it's not like we're proving ourselves to be the guys who understand or smart who understands this whole operation better than everyone else. But we are refreshing one another. That's the whole point. And of course, the mentorship sessions, like you said, Mr. Harris, will try to ensure that we pair with each one of us so that we discuss these things always and make sure that they are always embedded. Like we said, we are constructivists. Each one of you, as you are all starting to speak, you already had information about what facilitators are. And all we were doing is just to reinforce and to scaffold and also to sort of bring each other to the same level of understanding. So that's the whole point of us doing things like this. We will definitely take that advice, Mr. Kharesi. Thanks a lot.
yeah. Mr. P,
Yes, Mr. Boyd.
um, are you going to share with us this presentation?
Absolutely. Absolutely. I will upload it on YouTube as soon as it's available on YouTube. I will share with you the link.
Okay, cool.
Yes. Thanks. Any other questions or suggestions or contributions or ideas? If there are no questions, I appreciate the time that I've spent with you guys. I hope this was very much beneficial. We're going to continue these coming couple of Wednesdays and Fridays doing something like this. And I will take some time to also do some class visits. I'm not witch hunting. I'm not looking for anything. All I'm doing is like it's a developmental approach to say that we can always get better. So this whole month, I'm dedicating it to staff development. So I'll be coming to your class. Expect me or two or three of us in your classes. It's not witch hunting. It's not like I'm trying to sneak into your business, but we are trying to look at better ways to try and help each other become deliver better to our learners. If there is no any other thing, I appreciate your time. Enjoy your weekend. Make sure that you come back on Monday. Have that some time to rest. Come back on Monday refreshed. Wish you all the best.